Hello and welcome to our program. I'm your host, Katie Jones, and today we will be doing weaved paintings. So let's get started. I'm going to tell you what you need to make this happen. Your materials are going to be cardstock, and you want 2 pieces per painting. And then you need acrylic paint, paint brushes, a plate, a plastic plate or a paper plate work fine. That's just to put your paint on. And then you need a glue stick or multiples if you think you're going to use a lot or make a lot of pieces. And then you need a paper cutter, or you can use an X-Acto knife, and a cutting board or scissors work just fine. And then you also need a pencil, and I suggest having a ruler available, and then scrap paper or plastic, whatever you want to protect your table or your workspace. So we're going to get started. This is what my example looks like. And you can kind of see it's a weaved painting. So you can do it with acrylic paint, or you can also just use colored pencil or crayon. It's just that weave design. So basically you just make 2 identical paintings or designs, and then you're going to chop them up and weave them together. So you can kind of see on mine, I got a little bit bold, and I did a vine, and I didn't measure because that's just not my nature. And I hope for the best, and I think it's kind of cool. It's not exactly lined up, but I think it adds some character to it. So today I'm also going to do another pumpkin, and I'll show you. I'm just going to make 2 identical pieces, and then you can measure. I might measure a little bit today just to kind of like roughly get them in the same spot, and then just go for it. So my cardstock is 8.5 by 11. But for today's purposes, I am going to cut it to be an 8 by 10 because then I can cut it into strips that are 1 inch and I don't have to worry about varying it at all. So I have my paper cutter, and I'm just going to cut a 1/2 of an inch off to make it 8 by 10. And that'll just kind of help make the process go a little bit faster. And if you're hoping to frame it, they make 8 by 10 frames, so it would be perfect for that. So I'm just going to chop off 1/2 inch, and now it's ready to roll. So, I mean, it doesn't make a huge difference, but when you're cutting it, you don't have to worry about it as much. So I'm just going to quickly make 2 different designs. Not 2 different designs, 2 designs. And I'm going to use my scrap paper and just put it under it to protect my surface. And you can use whatever acrylic paint you want to use. And I just like to use a paper plate because I can throw it away afterwards. You can certainly use plastic. Sometimes, it's better because you can wash it off and you're not wasting the paper, but also it's bad for acrylic paint to go down the drain. So, pick your poison. Okay, I'm just going to start with a basic pumpkin. And with that one, I did start with the grass, so maybe I will do that really quickly. I got distracted. Okay, so I'm going to start with my grass, actually. So I'm just going to get a little bit of green and use a brush. I have a wide variety of brushes today. So this one's just more of like a coarse kind of brush. And I'll make my grass. And when you're painting, I would suggest a kind of thin layer, because depending on which weight of cardstock you're using, it will warp easily. You can use cardstock, you can use computer paper, or just, basic printer paper, but I do like the cardstock because I think it holds up a little better. You can probably even do it on like a piece of canvas, but I thought this weaved texture looks good. So, you just want a really kind of thin layer, just enough to make a difference. And I'm just lightly pulling my strokes upward, and that kind of gives it that nice grass texture. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. Like I said, I hope for the best. If you want to get precise with it, you can. If you want it to look very similar to the other one, just light And then if you also wanted to take and use a couple different colors together and dip them to give the grass more dimension, you can do that as well. Or you can take a nice little thin brush and go behind and work its way through the grass. But for today, like I said, keep it simple, Sally. All right. Beautiful. And I liked the colored cardstock because, like I said, if you paint too much, it kind of gets warped. You certainly can, because once you weave it, you won't really be able to tell. But I didn't want to have to paint like all of the sky one color, or like the whole thing. I didn't want to paint the whole thing, basically, is what I'm saying. Okay, so I have that. And I didn't have it in my list of supplies, but I do have a nice little cup of water here, just for when I'm done with my brushes, I can throw it in and keep working. So that's there for when I need it. So now I have my grass done, and I'm going to start with my pumpkins. So like I said, I'm not really going to measure a whole lot, but I might do a little bit. So I have my little pencil, and let's just say I want the top of my pumpkin. Stop around. Well, let me see where the middle of my paper is really quickly. Be careful so that you don't get it in the paint. So I'm just going to mark, the halfway mark would be 5.5. And I'm going to go up about 6 inches. And I'm just going to mark it. And then I'll also see how wide I want it to be. Let's just say maybe 3.5, and then 7.5. Is that right? 1, 2, 3.5. 3.5. Yep. That isn't quite big enough though. This is why I don't measure. All right, we'll do that. So my pumpkin's gonna be that wide. So I'm just going to do the same thing on this one. That'll just kind of help me get my measurements right. So 2.5, 8.5, and then I'll go mark the middle again, and I'll go up about 6 inches and mark it. And then I might even mark like how tall. I'm not going to get that particular with it. You could mark where your stem's going to be, but it's really fine. Don't worry about it. But I can actually use the marks that I made and use them as my lines for the different sections on the pumpkin. You really don't have to get this particular with it. I surely didn't, and I'm still really happy with the way it looks. Just showing you a few options. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to do a technique called one-stroke painting. You don't have to do this. This is just something that I'm going to do today. And we are potentially going to be offering a class with doing one-stroke painting. So be on the lookout for that. That's probably going to be like an in-person class. So just keep your eyes out for that. We might do a little combo action of both of them. So that's where I want my top to be. I think this was easier when I didn't measure, honestly. So I'm just going to take and make my pumpkin. And basically you just want to make sure it has good dimension. The good thing about acrylic is if you mess up, you can just go over it and continue until it makes you happy. With my first one, I didn't love it as much as my second one, so I kind of mirrored it on the second one after I was done, because I kind of learned a little bit as I was going along. So that might happen, that's okay. So basically I'm just taking two colors and putting one color on one side, one color on the other side, and then painting along. And that'll give it more dimension, you'll see as I go through it. otherwise, if the pumpkin was just one flat color, it would just look like a big orange blob. So we want to give it some dimension and make it a great little happy pumpkin. Great pumpkin, Charlie Brown. Alright, so I'm going to fill in the middle. Kind of makes it look like it has some life to it. And then I'm just going to keep going. And with a pumpkin, it kind of starts bigger, and then because of depth perception, gets smaller as it goes down on the different ridges. So I'm going to make each section a little bit smaller as I work my way through. And normally I would work backwards. I would start like on that side, but since I didn't draw it out completely, kind of getting the rough gist of it, and then I can always fix it as I go along. And you want to just have fun with it. As long as it makes your heart happy, it's going to be a great piece of art. It's different if you're commissioning it and the person asks for something in particular, but most of the time, art should be for your own enjoyment in life. This is a great technique to use when you're painting flowers. That's where I see it most of the time. We offered a class one time called One Stroke Flowers. It was for seniors mostly. It was our seniors trying art program. But it's just great because you can mix the two colors together, paint your flower designs, and it looks really great once you're done. Alright, so I got half of my pumpkin done. And now I'm going to do the other side. I got a little bit too much of the orange. And if this seems to be like not the technique for you, you can always take and make it one color and then go back and add some shading and some highlights and kind of adapt it to what you want it to look like. Oopsies, wrong one. And a lot of times people will kind of like grab their colors and then brush them back and forth on their plate before they put it down on the paper to kind of get the colors blended before they do their strokes. For today's purposes, I'm trying to move kind of quickly, but it's definitely an option. I'm just going to go back through and fix a few little areas. Alright, so I think this one is basically ready. Alright, so got that done. Alright, that's enough for that one. And now, like any good exercise, what we do on one, we're going to do on the other. Alright, so I'm going to start here, and I just make like a little oval. You're probably wondering why I keep my paints upside down, because it looks a little weird. Well, when I store them, it's easier to tell what color they are without having to lift them all up, and it makes them come out faster when I go to squeeze them. So that's why I always store them at home like that, or in our art closet. Here I like to do that if I can, and that way it makes it a little bit easier. Always recommend giving it a good shake though, still, even though it's all at the bottom, but you need to mix it up and get the content flowing. And then you'll be ready to make your piece of art. Alright, that's great. Just gonna fill in the middle of it. Oh, this makes me so happy. Alright, so one side. And it may not be exactly the same, but it'll be close. And like I said, if you get one done, you figure out they don't exactly look the same, you can always fix it. Go over it with a nice thin layer and adjust as necessary. So basically I'm making the stroke from like the next rib of the pumpkin, but I am going back and fixing it because when I pull my brush stroke through, it gets into the layer I've already done. So that's why it is nice to work backwards, but it's also harder to see like where you're going. So if you draw it out beforehand, that is really helpful. But for today's sake, I did not. That is okay. Alright. So, just making sure I have all my colors blended nice and smoothly. Now I'm going to do it on the other side. Who doesn't love a nice big happy pumpkin? That's why fall's the best season of all. Alright. So I'm almost done with this part. And then we can add a little bit of dimension and add some details. That's the fun part. I did want to keep it simple. If you're going to add a detail like a crow or something, I would try and kind of measure it and line it up, because otherwise it really might be out of place. I'll let that one dry and come back to it. Sometimes you have to like get the paint off of your brush that you've already had, because it's not really looking right. Blending together the way you hope it will. So I'm gonna get my shape and then I'll go back in and fix it. Whew, that one was a mess. That's okay. We will fix it. Okay. So now I'm just going to take and fix my mess that I made. Now that I have the basic shapes, it's easy to see what my intentions are. And your pumpkin doesn't have to be orange. You can make a yellow pumpkin. Nice little green pumpkin, a white pumpkin. Those are beautiful. Make gourds and squash. Alright. So I have a cute little pumpkin. I don't want my paint to be super thick because I'm going to chop it up shortly. So I'm trying to thin it out a little bit. That one I really got a little wonky with, but that's okay. It's okay. Okay, so that part's done. It's not perfect for today's purposes, but we're not too worried about it. And I don't believe I'm going to do any more orange. I'm going to put that in my water, and I don't need a big paintbrush, so Set that there for a second. And now I'm just gonna make my stem. And I'm gonna take a light brown and a dark brown. Just a dab will do. You don't need a whole lot of paint. That's actually too much, but that's okay. And I'm just gonna make a cute little stem. And with this, again, you can measure and try and angle it the same. I'm just eyeballing it for today. I actually should have started with the other one because I'm trying to get one done first and then the other one, because then we'll cut them in that order. But I just took some brown and added a little bit of light brown. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with this one. And right. And again, you can do this with crayons or markers to make it a little bit more kid-friendly. You can even take and give them coloring sheets if you think that it's going to be a struggle to have two the same. They might not enjoy it as much sometimes because they want to do different activities, but if they see the goal, then they'll understand. I'm done with my brown, so I'm going to put that away. And now I'm going to get a little bit, oh, I have dark green still. Might need a little bit more. If they understand the goal, then the kids will have fun with it. Maybe space it out, do one day, one the next day, and then have a day where you can put them together. Alright, so now I'm just going to make a nice little leaf. Just going to make a nice little line and take it down. Make my outline first, and then I'll kind of paint her in. And keep going. Using a smaller brush for this, just so I can get a little bit more detail. You can also use an angled brush. With the one stroke painting, use a flat brush so that you can achieve the look that you're going for. I don't know the exact name, my apologies, but just use a nice little flat brush. Okay, now I'm just going to take a little bit of light green and fill it in. Give it some love, some character. And I'm going to do the same thing. So, you can make a couple leaves, you can make a vine, really jazz it up. And give it some nice little character. But it looked a little lonely without a leaf, so. Alright. So that part is ready. And just a little bit more. Okay, perfect. So, I'm going to clean up my space a little bit while those dry, and then I'll show you how to put it all together. So I'm just going to move my stuff out of the way. I won't need my ruler anymore because we cut it to size. That's why I like doing that, because it makes it a little bit easier when you go to put it all together. Move that. And you can use a paper cutter or you can use an X-Acto knife, and I recommend having a metal ruler like I had today and using that. You can always take and just slice it up, measure it out, or plain old scissors will work. But I do have my paper cutter. I got it like 50% off when the craft store was having a sale, and you can use it for anything. So, highly recommend getting a paper cutter because it's wonderful. Okay, so for mine, I just did 1-inch sections. You can do them as big or as small as you want. I found this to be a healthy size for this project. So, I would cut them in 1-inch sections. And in my head, I was thinking, well, do I want one to be the top or the bottom? Like, does it matter? And I decided that I wanted the better looking one to be the top one, so I cut it second, but it doesn't matter. So, just take and start chopping them up. Now, you are going to have to cut one in one direction and one in the other direction. So, this one's pretty dry, and I'm going to start cutting it. So, I'm going to make this one, I'm going to cut it horizontally. So, because I made it all, it's still like the tiniest bit wet, but I think I am actually going to take, I would let it dry all the way, but for today's purposes, I'm just going to take my scrap paper and just make sure I get it all off, because the little guide on the paper cutter might like pick up some of the paint and put it on other pieces, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to do that with both really quickly, and then it'll be ready, because I did paint it a little bit thicker because I was trying to work quickly. But let it dry completely before you do this step, and you'll be good. You can always use like a hair dryer. I don't really recommend the paper trick, but it is what it is. Okay, so I'm going to take and do that. And I'm going to try and keep them in order once I get them cut. So I'm just going to like lay them out in the order that I cut them. I'm just going to cut that one at 6. And again, you can use a ruler and an X-Acto knife. I do recommend a metal ruler, because if you use plastic, sometimes if you get a little wonky with your cutting, you can cut the plastic and it doesn't cut your paper correctly, and it will cause your ruler to be messed up, and then it's not straight any longer. So a nice metal ruler is the trick with that one. So I do recommend that. And just like a self-healing mat works. That one is like a probably 8 by 10 or 11, something like that. I would recommend one to be a little bit bigger, just because for paper this size, you do have to kind of maneuver it to get it to fit correctly. And it did pick up a little bit of my paint, but that's okay. So the next one, I'm going to cut the other direction. So I'm just going to turn it, and because I cut it to be 8 by 10, I just run it through. But this is the one that's 11, or no. It was 8. I should have cut another inch off. I should have cut it to be 8 by 10, but it's actually 8 by 11, which is fine. And I can even cut an inch off of all of them to make it an 8 by 10. But I'm not planning on framing this one, so that's okay. So if you're doing it, I would cut 1/2 inch off of the 8.5 side and then an inch off of the other side. I knew something looked a little weird. That's okay. Alright. This is the fun part. Kids will enjoy this. They're like, what are we doing? You're cutting up our nice painting that we just made. Yes. And I actually still have pencil marks on here, but they might be hidden, so I'm not going to worry about it yet. If for some reason they're not hidden, I can just take and lightly erase them. Alright, so only 2 more cuts, and then we will be ready for the magic. Only 1 more cut now. Okay. Boom. So I've kept them all in order, and now we're ready. Okay. So now I'm just going to move it all over and start kind of lining it up. And it's just like regular paper weaving if you're making like placemat or something like that that kids always do in school. But with this one, I'm going to start, and you want to line it up exactly. So you really want it to be like a right angle. And I'm just going to take a glue stick. I like glue sticks better because they dry right away. So I definitely recommend a glue stick for this project. And when you weave, it's just like doing the opposite. It's just like weaving on a loom. You just want it to go in and out, in and out. So I'm going to glue that down. And then I'm going to glue my next one down. And you just want to make sure, like I said, that it just stays super lined up. You want the top and the bottom, all of the angles to be just right. So that's just right, and I'm just going to glue it down. And I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to put that one on top. And line her up. Oopsie. I'm just going to keep going. Just keep going. Just keep going. And glue it. You don't have to get it on like every single edge. I just kind of get it enough on there so it's not going to move and wobble around. You just want it to be tacked in place. I'm just checking, and you should be able to see where like your pumpkin's kind of lining up, at least on this one. It will start to get a little bit hairy once we get the second layer kind of weaved in, but that's okay. So I would recommend this for kids that are, you know, a little bit older, that have a little bit more of an attention span and attention to detail and patience, of course. It is a little bit of a process, but I think it looks really cool once it's all put together. And I'm just going to line her up, making sure my top kind of looks like it's lined up as well. My bottom, everything. The whole shebang. And I'm just going to glue that on. Glue this one on. Should be almost there. Perfect. And last one. Now it is important, you do have to try and get them pretty close and tight together because you might have some pieces that are overlapping, and that's to be expected. Like that one goes a little bit longer. That's okay. No worries. Okay, so now I'm just going to start weaving them. And I'm just going to go in and out. Sometimes it's easier for me to start at the top and then kind of shimmy it down. Just going to pull it down. And make sure it's lined up across the way. So it's lined up on this edge. It's pushed as tight as it can get down at the bottom. And you can either glue as you go along, or you can glue it all at the end at this point. I think I'm gonna wait and just do it all at one time. So that's what I do. I just weave it in and out, in and out. This is the part that's fun for the kitties. And I did that wrong. I knew something was easy about that. So yeah, just go opposite each time and put it together. All right. That one's a little harder to tell if it's lined up, but you can always flip it over and check. So I'm just going to flip it over and make sure it looks like it's nice and lined up. I like to do it, you know, one by one instead of trying to fix it all at the end. In case it's not lined up, it'll rip or be a little bit more difficult. So if I do it one at a time, it kind of helps alleviate some of those headaches before I have them. That one up. This was such a cool project when I saw it online, because it's just something you don't really see as often. It's like, how did they do that? But just two identical paintings is the trick. And you know, if it's not completely identical, it gives it a little bit more substance. That is A-okay. Now that one's not lined up exactly on the end, but that's because we had a little bit of an overlap, and that's okay. Basically anything's okay with your art. You get to do what you want to do, as long as it makes your heart happy. That's the most important thing. You're having fun while doing it. Gonna scoot it down some and shimmy. Sometimes once I get towards the end, it helps to kind of lift them up to scoot them in a little bit further because they're starting to get a little bit tight, harder to maneuver. Going. Again, just pick it up and kind of scoot them down into place. And then you can just kind of fold them back over. I need to shimmy a little bit that way. This is the part where it starts getting a little bit more challenging. I only have two left. All right. Oh yeah, it's looking like it's lining up pretty well. The measuring definitely helps. With that, I'm just making sure it's all in there good. And I don't think my top one's gonna fit perfectly, but we can always trim it once we are done. So I'm just gonna weave through what I can. And that one's coming out some. Alright. We're just gonna have to keep kind of like making sure everything stays into place. This is where you start checking to make sure you did okay with your weaving down at the bottom. Alright, and then just kind of see like where you can kind of get it to go down a little bit. Alright. I think it's honestly as good as it's gonna get down there. So I'm gonna have to trim, and that's okay. That's to be expected with paper weaving. Okay. So now I would take and glue it all together. So I'm just making sure it's nice and lined up. I'm happy with it. Alright, and then I'm just gonna take my glue stick and glue the top. For today's purposes, I'm not gonna glue it all. If you're making this at home, I would recommend you glue it all together. But for today, I'm not gonna worry about it. Now with this one, you can see my stems definitely did not line up for some reason. So you can always, you know, do it backwards if you want. Or if you notice it really is like messing with your brain and you want to fake it, you can always take and fix your stem. That's why if you want it to be pretty particular, I would measure. So I would do one side, do the other side. And then, because it's not completely lined up, I'll show you what I would do. And like, if I was doing this at home, and what I did with that one, I glued all the sides, everything together, again, to save you some time from fast forwarding. I'm not gonna do that today, but I definitely recommend you do that at home. Okay, so let's imagine I glued it all down. That piece is not staying. Okay, I glued it all down, but I did have a little bit of overlap. So I'd pull out my handy dandy paper cutter, and I just want to make sure it's all kind of lined up and beautiful. So I would just take and cut off the excess paper, so there's no like weird overhang. And I'm just gonna line it up. Give it a little trim. And then this one needs it as well. And you can kind of see like it's longer than what I started with, but that's just because it's hard to get all the pieces super tightly woven. Okay. So that's the finished product. You have a nice woven painting. So you can do it with any type of material and just weave it together, and it looks really great, and people are going to wonder how you did it. Thanks for watching this program, and don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our channel for plenty of more programs. Have a good day.